My father cried to me about his breakup 3 hours after I delivered my stillborn son, then told family I was inconsiderate for not comforting him through his romantic crisis. At 2 a.m., I got the call that shattered my heart. My baby was dead. At 32 weeks pregnant, Oliver's heart had simply stopped beating. While I was still trying to comprehend what the doctor had just told me, I had only one thought: I need my father. Despite our complicated history, despite all the times he'd disappointed me, this would be different. This would make him the grandfather I'd always hoped he could be. But I was about to learn that some people never change, not even when faced with the ultimate tragedy. I lay in the hospital bed as contractions began, my husband Thomas holding my hand while I called Dad. "We're losing the baby," I whispered through my tears. "Oliver is gone. I need you here." The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the connection had dropped. Then came his voice, flat and businesslike. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. When do you need me there?" Not, "I'm coming right away," or "I love you," or anything a father should say to his daughter in her darkest moment. Just logistical questions, like I was asking him to help move furniture instead of mourning his first grandchild. "The doctors are inducing labor tomorrow," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't know exactly when, but we want family here to say goodbye to him." His response left me speechless. "Well, I need to let my work know how long I'll be away, so I need a better time frame than that." Can you imagine? His grandson had died, and his biggest concern was his vacation request. "Dad, I don't know exactly. The medication can take hours or days to work." He kept pressing. "The hospital must know something. Just ask a doctor, they'll know." Thomas grabbed the phone from my shaking hands. "Robert, your daughter just lost her baby. Figure it out with your work." Click. The next morning, Dad arrived with his girlfriend Angela, and when I saw his red-rimmed eyes and devastated expression, I felt a moment of relief. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this loss was affecting him as deeply as it was me. But as the hours passed in the hospital, I realized something was terribly off. Dad sat in the corner like a statue throughout the entire ordeal. He didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, didn't even acknowledge our 3-year-old son Liam, who was confused and scared by all the adult emotions he couldn't understand. It was like he was physically present but emotionally checked out completely. When Oliver was finally born, silent and perfect and heartbreakingly small, the nurse gently placed him in my arms. Thomas and I wept as we memorized his tiny features, his delicate fingers, the way his hair curled just like Liam's had as a baby. The hospital photographer took pictures we'd treasure forever, the only moments we'd ever have with our son. Throughout this sacred, devastating time, Dad remained in his corner, staring at nothing. When I tried to show him Oliver, to let him hold his grandson, he barely glanced over before looking away again. Angela was the one who came forward, touched Oliver's little hand, and whispered how beautiful he was. 3 hours after Oliver's birth, while I was still processing the physical and emotional trauma of losing my child, Dad finally spoke up. "You should probably go home to Liam. He's very confused and he needs you." I stared at him in disbelief. I had just given birth. I was still bleeding, still in pain, still trying to process the reality that I'd never take this baby home. And his advice was for me to get up and take care of everyone else's needs while ignoring my own. The sterile hospital room suddenly felt suffocating, the beeping machines a constant reminder of everything we'd lost, and my father's indifference was the cruelest addition to an already unbearable day. Dad suddenly stood up and walked toward the elevator without another word, his wrinkled shirt and disheveled appearance making him look lost. Thomas, worried something might be wrong, followed him down to the parking garage. When he returned 20 minutes later, his face was grim, that look he gets when he's trying to protect me from something painful. "What happened?" I asked, adjusting Oliver's tiny blue blanket around his still form. Thomas glanced toward Angela, who was pretending not to listen, then back at me. "I'll tell you later," he said quietly, but I could see the anger building in his eyes, the same protective fury I felt whenever someone hurt our family. We finally went home that evening, all of us emotionally and physically drained from the worst day of our lives. Liam clung to me, sensing something was wrong but not understanding what had happened to his little brother. Dad and Angela settled in our living room, Dad maintaining that eerie silence while Angela tried to help with dinner and bedtime routines. The house felt too quiet without the anticipation of a newborn's cries. Oliver's nursery door closed like a monument to shattered dreams. Around 9 p.m., Angela excused herself to use the bathroom, and the moment she was out of earshot, Dad turned to me with tears in his eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all day. "Sarah," he said with a breaking voice, "Angela and I broke up, but I don't want to talk about it right now." The words hit me like a physical slap. I stared at him, my brain struggling to process what he'd just said. My son had died today. I had labored for hours to deliver a baby I'd never get to raise, had held my child's lifeless body while trying to memorize every detail of his perfect face, and my father, the man who was supposed to comfort me, support me, help me through the worst day of my life, was confessing his relationship problems to me while I sat there in my blood-stained hospital gown, still feeling the phantom kicks of a baby who would never move again. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "We broke up," he repeated, now openly crying in a way he hadn't cried for Oliver, for me, for any of the actual tragedy we were living through. "I'm devastated, Sarah. I don't know what I'm going to do without her." Something inside me snapped completely. All the grief, all the rage, all the years of disappointment in this man who had failed me over and over again came pouring out in a torrent of clarity. This wasn't just about today, though today was the final straw. This was about a pattern stretching back decades, back to when I was 16 and told my parents about being sexually abused by my grandfather, only to have them dismiss and ignore my trauma like it was an inconvenience. "I cannot handle this right now," I said with deadly calm, my voice cutting through his sobs like ice. "I think you need to leave. Don't contact me." Dad looked stunned, like he genuinely couldn't understand why I was upset, why his daughter wasn't rushing to comfort him in his moment of romantic crisis. "Sarah, wait," he started, reaching for my arm. "No," I said, standing up despite the pain shooting through my body, despite everything. Get out of my house right now." The living room where we'd planned to rock Oliver to sleep suddenly felt like a crime scene, contaminated by my father's selfishness. "But I'm grieving too," he protested weakly. "You're grieving your girlfriend," I shouted, not caring if I woke Liam, not caring if the neighbors heard every word. "My son died today, your grandson died today, and you're sitting in my living room crying about your breakup like some teenager." The absurdity of it hit me like a truck. Here was a grown man, a father and grandfather, making the death of his own grandchild about his dating life. Angela emerged from the bathroom, clearly having heard the shouting, her face pale and uncomfortable. "We're leaving," she said quietly, family, already gathering their things with shaking hands. Robert, come on. As they packed their bags, I thought about all the moments I'd needed a father and gotten disappointment instead. When Mom died and he disappeared into his own grief, leaving his 4 children to plan their mother's funeral. When I graduated college and he missed it for a golf tournament. When I got married and he spent the reception complaining about the food. That night, after Dad and Angela drove away into the darkness, I held Thomas while we both cried for our lost son. But mixed in with the grief was something else. Relief. Relief that I'd finally said what needed to be said. That I'd finally stopped making excuses for a man who had never deserved them. I thought about Oliver. About how I would have moved heaven and earth to comfort him if he'd lived to experience pain. I thought about Liam, sleeping peacefully upstairs, and how I'd rather die than let him feel as abandoned as my father had made me feel over and over again. Some people show you exactly who they are in crisis moments, and my father had just revealed his true self in the cruelest way possible. The next day, my phone rang 4 times, Dad's name lighting up the screen each time like an accusation. I couldn't handle hearing his voice, the thought of more selfish demands making me physically sick, so I asked Thomas to answer if it seemed urgent. He used about 30 seconds asking how we were. Thomas told me after the call, his jaw clenched in barely controlled anger. Then it was 30 minutes of him complaining about Angela. He told me he's already signed up for a dating site because now he needs to find a new girlfriend. I stared at my husband in complete disbelief. Less than 24 hours after his grandson's death, my father was focused on finding his next romantic relationship, scrolling through profiles while we planned a funeral for a baby who never got to take his first breath. But Dad wasn't finished with his campaign of self-centeredness. Later that day, my grandmother called, her voice upset and confused in that way that meant someone had been filling her head with lies. Sarah, honey, your father called me. He's saying you were difficult at the hospital, that you didn't even ask why he was sad when he was clearly struggling. He thinks you were very inconsiderate given everything he's going through with his breakup. I sat in Oliver's nursery, surrounded by unopened packages of diapers and tiny clothes he'd never wear, absorbing the audacity of it all. Even now, even after everything, he was making himself the victim, rewriting history to paint me as the cruel daughter who hadn't shown enough concern for his broken heart while I was literally holding my dead child. Grandma, I said slowly, my voice steadier than I felt. Did he tell you that Oliver died yesterday? Did he tell you that I spent hours in labor delivering my stillborn son while he sat in a corner saying nothing? That he told me about his breakup 3 hours after I gave birth? The silence stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up on me. Finally, she spoke, her voice much softer and filled with the horror of understanding. Oh, honey, no, he didn't tell me any of that. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I had no idea. It was a small vindication, but it confirmed what I'd always known about my father. He could spin any story to make himself look like the victim, even when he was the one causing pain. That afternoon, I blocked my father's number, his social media, his email, every possible way he could reach me. Thomas supported me completely, as did my friends who knew our history of disappointment and abandonment. Some people tried to tell me I was being too harsh, that grief makes people act strangely, that I should forgive him because he's family. But they didn't understand what it felt like to need your parent desperately and get betrayal instead. They didn't know about the decades of emotional neglect, the pattern of selfishness that had defined our relationship since childhood, the way he'd consistently chosen his own comfort over his children's well-being. Oliver's funeral was small and heartbreaking, filled with people who truly loved our family, and my father's absence felt like a gift rather than a loss. Months later, I heard through my grandmother that Dad was engaged to someone he'd met on that dating site, a woman he'd started talking to just days after Angela left him. The news didn't surprise me, but it confirmed everything I'd always known about him. My father was fundamentally incapable of putting anyone's needs above his own, even for a few hours, even when his daughter was experiencing the worst loss of her life. He'd moved on from his grandson's death as quickly as he'd moved on from his breakup, treating both as minor inconveniences in his quest for personal happiness. Some people might call what I did cruel, cutting off my only remaining parent, but I learned something important in those dark days after losing Oliver. Family isn't just about blood, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself from people who would use your pain against you. I'm raising Liam to be different now, to understand that love requires sacrifice sometimes, that being there for people matters more than your own comfort. When he's older and asks about his grandfather, I'll tell him the truth, that sometimes people show you exactly who they are, and believing them the first time can save you years of heartbreak. Oliver deserved better than a grandfather who couldn't spare a moment's genuine grief for his death. Liam deserves better than a grandfather who would teach him that selfishness is acceptable, and I deserve better than spending my life waiting for a father who will never become the man I needed him to be. Sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about having the strength to let go.